Good afternoon in New York. Good evening if you're in Europe or wherever you are in the world. Welcome. My name is Matthew Higgs, and I'm the director of White Columns in New York. And we're thrilled to be hosting this conversation via Zoom on and around Pippa Garner's survey exhibition, Act Like You Know Me, which is currently on view at White Columns in New York. It's the final week. The exhibition closes on December 16, and we're thrilled to be joined by the artist, Pippa Garner from Los Angeles, and many of the people who have been involved in putting this exhibition together, staging it in different institutions in Europe, and making it such an extraordinary and resonating success. We also want to congratulate Pippa on the recent award at Los Angeles Hammer Museum, $25,000 award, which is, of course, entirely justified. So congratulations for that, Pippa. I'm going to hand over to Fiona Duncan, who's one of the co-creators and originators of the exhibition, and was involved in the installation, very closely involved in the installation in New York City. And from White Columns' perspective, we're eternally grateful to all of Fiona's work on the project as it manifested in New York. And Fiona will introduce some of our speakers, and we can begin the conversation. So please welcome Fiona Duncan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. And we're very, very excited to have Pippa present and to be able to further introduce her to people who made this show happen. The show it opened in Munich in September 2022, and it went on to travel to the Kunsthalle Zúrich opening in February 2023. And then 2 weeks later, we opened in Metz, France at the FRAC Lorraine. And then it came to New York. So it's been a really long and exciting run with 4 stops, 4 institutional directors, many co-curators, many contributors, many witnesses, just a really big group project. So it's nice to be able to take a moment to celebrate and mark this moment in time. I wasn't really paying attention because I ran here from my yoga class and I'm kind of messy, but I don't know if Matthew did proper introductions, but we have a number of people here today as speakers. We have Daniel Baumann, who is from the Kunsthalle Zúrich. We have Fanny Gonella from the FRAC Lorraine. We have Lois Lambert, who is a friend of Pippa's, old friend of Pippa's, and someone who exhibited one of my favorite works of Pippa's. And we have Cooper Lee Bombardier, who contributed a really vital moment to the book that we published, Oral History, and who knew Pippa during her years in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the format I thought about was, I want everyone to get as involved with Pippa as possible. Oh, that's the book. So we published a book. It's really beautiful. It was designed by HIT and published by Birka Books, and it was edited by myself and Mauren Dietrich, who is the co-curator of all the shows throughout, and who is about to give birth any day now, and so isn't with us unless maybe she's a witness secretly from her couch, which I could see happening. I haven't looked at the participants list. So a big thank you to Mauren. I guess to kick it off, I thought maybe we could ask each of the participants. My thought was to ask each of the participants one question and have them ask Pippa one question and then kind of take it from there. And Matthew Higgs had actually prepared some really beautiful questions that are better than the questions I prepared for our fellow directors. So maybe we'll start there. If Matthew, you had a question for Fanny, and or Daniel, collectively Danny.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I think it's also the context in which this exhibition, Act Like You Know Me, took place, I think is very interesting because it's taking place within a much wider consideration of Pippa's work within the art world. There's been other publications, a recent exhibition at Art Omi in upstate New York, with its own publication. Primary Information did a republication of one of Pippa's seminal publications from the 1980s. And I think my question to everybody relates to the art world's current interest or recent interest in Pippa's ideas. And Pippa's ideas previously had circulated in more mainstream platforms through magazines, the press, through publications, even through the television. And I think one of the things that's very interesting to me is, and the question really is, how does the context of the museum or the gallery impact our understanding of Pippa's work, which had previously circulated in a much, let's say, freer and more public fashion? So that would be, my initial question. Maybe I could just initially address it to Daniel, and anyone else can feel free to answer. But how does the context of the museum or the gallery impact our understanding of Pippa's work?
Okay, all right. Well, okay, easy question, Matthew. Thank you very much. That I can answer as the first person. Yeah, good question. I think what it first does, it bundles something into one space, obviously. It brings things together from very different sources, puts them into one space, and then we look at it, we make it accessible to an audience, to the public of, in our case, of Kunsthalle, the visitors of Kunsthalle Zúrich. But the thing that I was puzzled by, that even by displaying it into one space, making this bundle, creating narratives of all sorts of kind, it still proved itself as being quite resistant to the categories we usually apply to, or we try to apply when doing exhibitions. So that was certainly, I think, for all of us, Fiona and Maureen and Fanny, I think we all. Okay, my position was, I'm not going to I'm not going to put any categories here. I wanted to have, that's why we made these huge tables. I do a layout. I put things on a table and then let's see what it is. So that was our approach. And I think we followed Munich's and Fiona's approach. And I was very happy with this because it allowed us to think ourselves and keep it, have our own thoughts about it. I think, next exhibitions, next books, next articles, we'll do it in a different way, but that was important for me to just keep it on a table for the moment.
And Fanny, maybe, thank you, Daniel. Fanny, maybe you could respond.
Yeah, we were singing a lot about how not to do a photography exhibition, but still show images. That was always the ambivalence of the relationship we had to the material. And what I realized that I really enjoyed in the process of having the exhibition, and we had it for quite some time, was the physical desire in the space that was expressed by the visitors. We had much more younger audiences coming to the exhibition, and people were touching. And it was perfect because the prints were really done for the exhibition. There was nothing valuable or sacred about it. And everybody felt this freedom to touch it and really like go through it. So I think that the desire for the works was like with the condensation that you had with everything in one space was all of a sudden much more present. But more generally, the question of context is something that I really ask myself very often, because we work in a lot of different contexts. So in a way that felt very natural to combine different, how do you say, perspective on one topic in one space. Yeah.
Thank you. And Cooper, I think, Daniel mentioned this idea, which I think is really pertinent, this idea that the work's quite resistant to being categorized. It's not clear what it is, and maybe Pippa can clarify what some of it is, but this idea that these are somehow resistant objects or ideas, I mean, does that dovetail with your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, meeting Pippa in Santa Fe, it was like encountering a unicorn. at like the post office or at the video rental place, right? Of like this incredibly beautiful, charismatic, mysterious person who was an inventor, right? So I was encountering Pippa's art like as she wore it on her body in space and in community, or her human powered cars, pedal cars, kick scooters, bikes. And so this idea of seeing just this incredible span of making, right? The technical, just the technical prowess of Pippa's work over 50 years together to kind of, even though it is resistant, even though, you know, maybe Pippa's been resistant to being archived in some ways, that to see it over time, to see that body of work, to see the humor, the evolution of her thinking, and just like her technical prowess. I mean, her ability to machine things, fabricate things, to draw, to you know, it's just it's really exciting to see it and kind of to try to put a frame around it, right? This massive body of work, this lifetime of being a piece of art, basically.
Thank you, Cooper. Lois, this idea of categories in relation to Pippa's practice, is that a useful idea? You know, is that a useful idea? The idea of categories? I think you're muted, Lois.
Here. Lois, you're mute. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Lois.
No problem. I don't see how you can categorize anything that Pippa does, because Pippa is a seer. I mean, it's like he's an inventor who doesn't really want to know sort of the right way to do it, because all he's interested in is creating his vision, which is incredible and way outside the box. The box was never there for him and her. And I went through the him to her stage because I represented him 35 years ago. So at that point, he was Phil. And so I understood, we talked about the reason he wanted to be Pippa, or he wanted to change. I went through the process. When he started taking hormones and he came in and said, I've discovered peace. All you have to do is rain down estrogen and everything will be fine. So I don't know how to categorize them, nor do I really care to. The experience of being with Pippa and going through the transformation and watching him explode and his creativity is mind-boggling. I've never met anyone like him in the 35 years I've been in business. He's an extraordinary creative thinker. There is, and I always wondered, here as a man, he was in Vietnam, which certainly has something to do with himself today. We're exactly the same age. So we came out of the same era. I was born in Chicago, he was born in Illinois. We have certain perspectives, but he's a master at creating illusion, of creating mystery, and that's how he thinks. So I wouldn't have a clue how to categorize.
Thank you, Lois. Fiona, before we bring Pippa into the conversation, I just wondered whether when you and Maren were formulating, thinking about the exhibition, this idea of the art world, the climatizing in some respects to Pippa's practice, was that a conversation you had?
Maren definitely discussed what it meant for her to introduce Pippa's practice, which is so American, to a European context. And my kind of rebuttal to her not knowing what the role of a European or German institution was that often American artists rely on these European, and especially intellectual American artists who are critical of the US, rely on the European art world to validate them. And then they go back to the US and are like heralded. It's just very common. It's a common trope that happens. And so I was interested in using that in order to amplify Pippa's work and platform. But I also, you know, I come from a fashion background and a literary background and ended up by mutual attraction in the art world, which I think is just a place where a lot of intellectual traditions and thinkings have migrated to by necessity for economic reasons and other reasons. It's just like it's happened. And I really like a lot of the ways that the art world works, maybe because I'm not selling in the art world, so I don't actually have a problem with all the shitty things that the art world does, but just the ways of that that little things matter, you know, coming from fashion, everything's so disposable, and you know, history I think matters. Pippa's irreverent with regards to history. She's always like, what the hell are you doing, you know, with all this old shit, you know, I don't care about it. And for me, it's been so important to position this work within art history, because to me, it just like, it belongs there, absolutely. But I also come from the perspective that fashion is art, literature is art. You know, I get annoyed when people are like, do you make art? I'm like, yeah, I write. And they're like, no, but do you make art? And you're like, no. You know, this idea that visual art is the only art is absolutely absurd to me. So again, it was really important for me to insist that Pippa be taken seriously as a really great artist, and to take all of these different modes that she works in and put them in the one space that right now people use to read art, which is the institution and then an art book. So that was definitely a dialogue, and probably is boring to Pippa, so maybe when we flip the script now and have people ask questions to Pippa, we'll get more entertaining.
And so thank you, Fiona. Pippa, the first question from me to you is then, how did it feel to be archived, and how did it feel to have your work surveyed and to be seen in so many very different cultural institutions?
Well, it was almost as if it was someone else. I never considered any of that as my career, so to speak, was progressing. I was only concerned with the idea of the time that I was having. How can we make something that represents this? What are the resources? And let's do it. And then when that was finished, moving on to the next thing. And the whole idea that this would end up being an archive seemed absurd to me at this time. I never even thought of it one way or the other. It just wasn't part of my procedure. And I guess I don't know if that's the usual perspective of the artist or not. I should think that most would have some sense of what this was all for, ultimately, and I didn't. So I'm kind of an innocent with that. But I just don't know. I did something because it amused me, and then did something else because that amused me, and progressed through things. And obviously, whatever I was doing at the time was going to have influences of the culture and things that I was not consciously, at least, concerned about. So I have no answer. Sorry.
Thank you, Pippa. Fiona?
I was just wondering if anyone else prepared or has a question for Pippa. I know maybe Cooper, I was thinking, or Lois, I see Lois leaning in.
I'm leaning in because I've always been interested in where Pippa started. What going from Vietnam as a soldier to where you are is such an incredible transition, and affected you physically down the line, and yet you're so separated from that experience. But how has it affected you? I mean, outside of...
Well, yeah, for one thing, I have to qualify that. I was actually a combat artist in Vietnam, and that was for posterity as far as the military was concerned. They wanted opinions of what was going on from a non-military point of view, and so most of the people that did that were civilians, writers and photographers and artists, I guess. So this was an unusual thing for the Army to actually have an art team that was made up of troops, of soldiers. And so I traveled, I was with the 25th Infantry Division in Kuchi, which is somewhere between what was in Saigon and the Cambodian border. And there were a lot of, it was a big division, 10,000 men, and they had everything, artillery and infantry, and all the different divisions were represented there. And so we had an itinerary to go out with different ones, different units, and just spend whatever it would take, 5-6 days, sketching, taking pictures, feeling what it was like, what was going on, and then taking that all back to the base camp tent and doing some more final works based on the reference, and then sent out again to some other unit. And this went on for, in my case, almost 13 months. And so I was in the midst of it all, but not an active warrior, as it were. And there's a lot of aspects of this that are, I think, perhaps relevant and interesting. One of them is the fact that all the, thank you, my headphone came out. All of the aggressive actions that create wars and other things that are also perhaps have negative impact are from the male side. It's the term gunman. There's no term for a female version of that. It's just gunman. And I think that's, in my opinion and from my own experience, a result of testosterone toxicity. It's a hormonal thing. All this testosterone that's designed basically for reproduction. If it's not used for that, it can be diverted, I guess, to being a weapon, really, and that's what the military is all about. They train people. The first thing they do is to impersonalize them, put them in uniforms, and train them all alike to do the same things, and then at the end of it, give them a weapon. And so I think that if we are going to get past that thing has been stuck in human history for a long time, and now we're in the midst of another couple of wars. Same thing. Somebody at the top is a over testosterone influenced, aggressive person that wants to use it to conquer and it's disturbing to me that happens, and I think the only solution is to balance the leadership with men and women. You know, we can't have all men doing it. So until that happens, we're going to continue to have these open conflicts. And I don't know what that was all about, because it didn't have anything to do, perhaps, with the question. But I went through that, though, and when I came out of it, I was very much influenced by that fact that this was a male initiative, basically. And one of the things that made me think, what if I'm part of this too? What if I, as the term goes, hacked my gender identity? There are two choices, they're male and female. What if I tried to mix the two a little bit and see what happened as an artist? That was always my, what got me going on something was just an idea, a simple idea, nothing about the past or the future, just something that I felt due to my experience or the reaction to the environment around me, or both. And so at that time, it was in the 90s, the 80s rather, gender transition surgery was becoming more accessible. It had been complicated since the time of Christine Jorgensen way back in the 50s. Three surgeries, I think, or four surgeries it took to do what then was reduced to one simple 2-hour procedure, and that was it. You went in with one set of genitals, and you came out with the other. It's been also. I'm very materialistic. I'm a capitalist, and proud of it. And so this was something that you could go out and buy. If I was wanted to buy a vagina, all I had to do was get the money together and go through a little bit of preliminary nonsense with psychotherapists. But then there it was, just go over and pay and get it. So I did that. I went to Brussels and came back with a vagina, and not really particularly thinking of myself as being a woman. And I had sort of inhibitions about that. I'd been quite male through most of my life up to that point, oversexed and aggressive and all that. And so here I was suddenly with this new equipment and with quite a change in my endocrine system, since I no longer had any of the source of testosterone, and I found it just refreshing, and but a little bit too refreshing. So I mixed it up, and I added a little bit of testosterone. It's like having I guess being a chemist and pouring different fluids into a container and stirring them up to see what happens. And I was using myself as that entity. And I think, I was willing to take chances. When I did that, I thought, this is crazy. Is this going to ruin my life, or is this going to be great, or what? How would I find out? I have no way to find out but to go ahead and do it, commit to it. And I always had that attitude, kind of take a chance and see what happens. And throughout my career, I've been lucky most of the time, and the chances I've taken have ended up being productive. And I still feel that way. Here I am, 81 somehow, and with the same attitude. So I don't know if that deviated a bit from the question, but that's my answer.
Amazing, Pippa. Thank you. I think, one of the things that's become apparent to us at White Columns whilst we've spent time with your work over the last couple of months is, and I think perhaps it partly explains some of the art world's wider interest in your work, is just how prescient your ideas were or are, and how they actually resonate with some of the things that the art world has become focused on or very interested in the last decade, around questions of identity, questions of gender, and how those things are constructed. And it seems to me that a lot of these things are sort of anticipated in your work over the years. To Daniel and Fanny, introducing this work to your audiences in your respective institutions. I think myself and I think Fiona alluded to it before, that Pippa's practice is rooted very much in an American experience, whether that's the Vietnam War, post-war American consumerism, custom car culture and transformation, and so on. And I was just curious about how this aspect of Pippa's work, its Americanness, for want of a better term, how that was framed or understood or received locally in your different institutions. Maybe Fanny first.
Yeah, right. Thank you. It's interesting because in France, there is also a very ambivalent relationship to America. And I think Pippa is also both very American and very anti-American. So I think this deconstruction of all the symbols of America were very well received in a way, as a way to take down all these cliches and all these feelings or these impressions of power and domination. So I think that was one of the aspects, but also I think that the whole actions that Pippa took on clothing and playing with the way you wrap your body is something that is also very familiar here. And we chose for the poster of the exhibition the high heels on wheels. And this was also something that people could really relate to very straightforwardly. And I think this, the combination of glamour that is also embedded in some production, this love of shiny materials, and at the same time, the freedom to just twist them upside down was something. And it's also interesting. I think the presence of the fashion culture is very spread in France, and many of Pippa's creation have influenced fashion designers. So in a way, French people had already seen Pippa's work without knowing it was her work. So there was a kind of easy entrance through that. Definitely, I think the anti-Americanism, it was, sorry to say this here, but it was also a good entrance door for the French audience.
Daniel?
Yeah, I don't think people approach it in terms of Americanness. And it's also, Western Europe and Switzerland is heavily influenced by American culture, so it has become this huge mix of all sorts of, and especially of American consumer culture. But there is not like in the US, there might be, the US consumption is a national duty. That's what I learned when living there. So when the economy would go down, you got the call in that, guys, you have to consume. To no such thing in Europe. So I don't think we approach, or people here approach Pippa's work through this idea of Americanness or consumption. I think it's much more they were fascinated by was this extreme generosity of the work. It goes in all sorts of direction. It doesn't care about categories. It is extremely free and open. There's no moral, which actually is something in Europe we strongly connect to Americanness, is moral concepts. And so we couldn't see any of that morality flying around that we usually have, we're facing with American culture. So it felt, to a certain degree, it felt American and European at the same time, because it had this very free-spirited, experimental atmosphere around the work. And as Fanny said, we had a lot of young people coming in. Obviously, it's a big, big topic. But beside that, we have people, being interested in design and being fascinated by that, the crossover into design, the crossover into car culture, crossover into popular culture, and so on. And then obviously identity, the question of biography, how it is played out. So all this very complicated layers of culture in general, not just American culture, was present in the exhibition, and it felt very free. Some people spent 2 hours in this exhibition. I couldn't believe it. They would never leave. They were reading every single word, every text. I have never seen this, because they got so fascinated by all these different worlds they were facing. So, and that, I thought, it has to do with a very genuine generosity of people.
Thank you, Daniel. Cooper, maybe in the same line of thought, but picking up on something that Pippa mentioned, which is around this idea of consumerism and capitalism, and how that relates to the larger practice where Pippa's been creating these sort of paradoxical consumer objects that are almost redundant in their absurdity, but they stand as a kind of symbol for capitalism or consumerism. But also then thinking about how Pippa addressed that in relation to the body, and that you can buy something. Curious how that relates to your thinking and writing around Pippa's work.
Well, Cooper, I want to introduce a little bit more. Cooper knew Pippa in Santa Fe, and this was like when Pippa was the least interacting with the art world. I mean, there is a Santa Fe local scene, but it's like I guess it's a local, it's not the global art market. And Cooper has this amazing story that maybe you'll retell about the Xeroxes that you received from Pippa in anticipation of this queer cabaret you were putting on. Because in many ways, I think what you received was a micro version of what the show ended up, was the same material that the show was drawn from.
Sure. Yeah. So I, for about 3 years, ran a monthly queer trans cabaret in Santa Fe, where I lived there for about, I guess, like 8 years, 9 years. And so it happened at this like local pizza joint. They had a little stage in the corner. They let me do it. They were like, this is great. And it was a curated show. I just basically wanted something like this to exist where I lived. It didn't exist. It's like, well, I'll just do it. And I curated, 5 or 6 performers or musicians, filmmakers for every show. And I was lucky to finally convince Pippa to come and perform. And speaking of like lost archival materials, it kills me that we don't have video or any ephemera from Pippa's performance. It was called "How to Set an Example No One Else Can Follow," and so I had asked for bios and pictures from the performers, and Pippa left in my mailbox a manila envelope, and so I only knew Pippa as a person in my town, somebody who I was looked up to, was fascinated by, but then there was this little archive in my mailbox that let me know about Pippa's previous life, the backwards car, some newspaper clippings, a beautiful pinup postcard with a t-shirt that said, "I'd rather shovel shit than drive," which I had hanging in my room for forever and ever. And it was just, it was just this, it felt like such a gift, this opening of a little hatch into a part of Pippa's life. And, I'm so grateful. I want to just like dog leg here to go say, Fiona, I'm so grateful that you've pursued this work with Pippa and contextualizing her work, all the research you've done, trying to archive something resistant to archival requests or demands, and to contextualize Pippa for not only for folks who were aware of her work before, but for coming generations of folks to understand her work. And the performance at Lisp was it was so funny and perfect and hilarious. It kind of ties into Matthew's question about Pippa's take on gender as a material thing that we can manipulate, that we can buy, which for me is so refreshing, because and a lot of times, around gender, as a trans person, you think of it as this kind of angsty thing, or society hates you or whatever, and it can be so heavy, and to have somebody be so playful, and that gender is an extension of art practice, of expression, is liberating, right? This idea that it is something that is yours to manipulate and express how you want to is completely liberating. And I think that for me, that's always, I feel like Pippa, it's weird to talk about you like in the third person, you're right there, but you've always represented to me that sense of liberation, of complete freedom, of just the possibility of just doing your own thing, and that's a huge gift. It's a gift, and I really appreciate you for that. Yeah, I don't know, I don't want to natter on, but and I probably didn't answer the question either, so.
Well,
No, that's okay. I think
thanks,
that's general.
Cooper. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, Fiona.
I was like, I think that's the generosity that maybe Daniel was speaking to, and also why it's so exciting. Well, why I think it's important to put into posterity is this idea you present, Cooper, that it is also for future generations, because Pippa's still so prescient. Like, still some of the things that we're, mainstream is grappling with, Pippa has the answers if only they would turn her way, which they are turning her way more and more and more. Cooper, did you have any questions for Pippa, or maybe?
Sure. Along those lines, Pippa, I'm wondering, as somebody who strikes me as resistant to categorization, how does it feel to be regarded by younger generations more recently as a trans elder, whether or not you accept those identity terms, and what's it been like for you?
That's sort of an interesting thing. I'm just sort of as I progressed through my life, generation after generation after generation, I managed to just by luck coordinate with younger generations that or what I have done with my life seemed relevant. It wasn't any scheme of mine. I just was in the right place at the right time, as they say. And that's what happened with the gender situation. I started back before it was considered to be anything other than just kinky, which is all right. It's kind of a motivation in itself. But the fact that it has become something to really consider in terms of the various definitions that one might slap on the human race, was a lucky thing for me. I could have been at the generation that started to have more liberal ideas about gender identity, would be the next generation that would come, the one in the 24 or something. And I would have missed it, but it wasn't. It was time right for me. And that's been good, because it not only was lucky, but it was also an opportunity to expand my my own thinking by having it reflected on another part of the culture. So, again, there's not much to say about it. It was just interesting coincidence. And I think also, in terms of what I said about the need to balance gender leadership for any kind of peace in the world, mainly because the women have a internal reproductive system which gives them a natural sense of community that some males have, but often they don't. But it was just an interesting thing to play with. But you know, I was thinking too, you know, the notion of transgender, that term didn't even exist back when I was gender hacking. It was called transsexual. It meant that you had to jump over the fence. Whether you were male, you had to go to female, and vice versa. There wasn't any acknowledgement that there might be a comfort zone in the middle. And that's been recent, and that's where the notion of trans comes through. And perhaps, perhaps that's our future leadership that would end wars and violence. Who knows if 50 years, 100 years from now, all the major political figures will be transgender, and that will be accepted as normal because the extremes of the male and the female are not for the good of everybody. They tend to oscillate interests and not blend the whole thing. So I don't know. That's just a notion. Anyway, I think I forgot what the question was. Oh well. Yeah, that's trouble with babbling on.
We have about another 10 minutes bringing us up to the hour. So I just wanted to bring in one thing that a number of you have mentioned, and I think it's evident in the work that art often embraces humor, but art is rarely funny in and of itself. And you know, I think a great deal of Pippa's work is often laugh out loud funny, which I think ultimately makes the complex ideas at play in Pippa's work more accessible. So I was curious and interested about this idea of humor in Pippa's work and, you know, individual responses. And maybe Lois, we might start with you, having worked with Pippa such a long time in the work, which I think one of the great things in the exhibition at White Columns, which I think was in all the other exhibitions, was the amazing footage of Pippa on the Johnny Carson show. And it sort of sets the stage for art, which, you know, Cooper addressed perhaps too, with the idea of Pippa doing a stand-up in a pizza joint in Santa Fe. It's not where art typically finds itself, and so maybe Lois and everyone, we can just speak to the idea of humor.
I basically think that everything Pippa's ever done is humorous, has humor in it, has wit, and which is certainly humor. There isn't anything somber in this work. It's all about pitfalls and life's extremes and views from one side that people don't look at, but they all make you smile. I mean, his drawings from way back when he started are amazing. He's a sculptor, he's a painter, he's a photographer. And everything he does, his cars. I mean, I drove around in his yacht car with him. They're amazing. It's just the technology is amazing, his thought process is amazing, and they all make you smile. So to me, it's an integral part of his work.
And Fiona, when you were putting the exhibition together, I mean, how does humor function curatorially?
Oh, well, I unfortunately didn't get to be on site so much, so I didn't get to like observe people laughing. But when I did, it was really amazing. You don't hear people laugh that often in a museum. But yeah, no, I mean, Pippa's hilarious. And I think being funny, I mean, there's different types of humor. My boyfriend, who's an artist, his name is Matt Hilvers, he actually introduced me to Pippa's work, and he also comes from like a comedy background. He's like one of the funniest people ever. but he talks about how humor often doesn't transcend time because it's so site specific, but it's also the most elevated mode of intellect. Like if you can make someone laugh without, you know, also being cruel, I think that's a really debased form of humor. But make someone laugh and make them feel uplifted is the wisest, smartest thing you can do. So I don't know if we were thinking about it curatorially so much, but it's just infused with it.
Daniel?
It was certainly something that everybody reacted to, and there was something, as I think you said, Matthew, it makes it very accessible, or maybe you said it, Lois. There was a second thing that was also interesting. Everybody could see the humor and was drawn into it, but also then started to talk about the melancholy of the work. And I think they go together, and they make it. That's why people would stay for so long, because it's much more than just fun and wit, and it's at the same time very melancholic. And that combination is rare because it's light and heavy at the same time, and I think that worked especially well.
And Fanny?
It's interesting what you were to hear what you were saying, Daniel, about the melancholy, because of I think the French people didn't feel it at all, or nobody mentioned it ever. And I think it also has to do with the fact that melancholy is not a very French thing, or certain kind of like reworked melancholy. Nobody humor was really visible with the TV show, definitely, and it's not very often that you hear people laughing in an exhibition, and it's really nice to feel that the exhibition was bringing joy and a sense of freedom to people. But I also felt that humor was a way to connect us with our very human condition, that we are very limited. And the best thing we can do is to laugh about ourselves, because if we take ourselves too seriously, then we're lost. And I think it really connects with the fact that what you were saying, Pippa, earlier, that you just landed there because you were there. And I think not having a plan is already like allowing for this to happen. But maybe the humor was also a different way to, or at least it forced me. Maybe it's also like how it impacted me as a curator, because you just don't want to only laugh in front of the work. You also want to make the people enter the work in a different way. And I think that it forced me to think differently about what was interesting in the picture, why was it visually challenging. And I think that through that exhibition, it opened the door for me to think about other ways to look at art, or forging other criteria to look at art. And I think that's really what is where I'm grateful to your work, Pippa, is that it's forcing me to step out and to be like, okay, it's funny. It's not only funny, it's also visually extremely efficient and strong. And what is this mix? And the way you address visibility and invisibility is also very precise. And that's, yeah, I think for the future, it's also has an impact for us.
Thank you, Fanny. Pippa, maybe we can draw this to a close with you responding to the idea of humor, because I think one of the great comedic artworks of our time is your ongoing series of T-shirts, slogan T-shirts, which function as both jokes and punchlines. And over this vast number that you've made, it's just this great comedic, almost opera. So how were you thinking about humor, Pippa, in the work, you know, when you began and where you find yourself now?
Well, the T-shirt, first of all, was appealing to me because it's a junk or a trash medium. You know, it started out way back in the early 50s as a sort of ultra cool sort of James Dean look, you know, with the jacket open in the front and just showing a pure white T-shirt, which was probably military surplus from World War II. So anyway, people started wearing white T-shirts, and in some cases, rolling cigarettes up in the sleeve for a little added detail. And that went on for a decade, I guess, mostly, until some advertising agency genius was out looking, wandering around, and saw a lot of people wearing T-shirts, and thought, you know, that's a billboard for us. They're all wearing these blank things. Well, why don't we put our logo on there and get some free advertising out of the deal? Have a human billboard that sort of walks around and promotes our product. So suddenly T-shirts began to say Nike or Chevrolet or some other product, some sports team. And then instantly it seems like that caught on, and it became uncool to wear a white T-shirt. Nobody had them anymore. Everybody had some kind of advertising on their front, and they not only were giving the company free advertising, they were paying for it. So it was quite a profound, clever move by whatever, as I say, advertising person saw that and came up with the idea. So I thought, well, let's push it the other way. I was influenced a bit by an old friend, Ed Ruscha, with his words, using words for art, attracted me. I thought that was very compelling somehow, and what would I do with that? So I got a bunch of white T-shirts and some iron-on lettering, and started making up these shirts that were just like a silly phrase of some kind. I was just taking that idea and sort of popularizing or commercializing it, I guess. And I got so into that it became something, a ritual I had to do. Every day I had to make a new shirt. So I did that for several years. And then all of a sudden, I lost the vision of my left eye. And it turned out I had advanced glaucoma. My right eye was affected too, but I could still see, but it became very difficult to draw. And as the disease progressed, and this was over the last 10 years, my vision has declined to the point of where today I can barely see. I have a little bit left, but not much of the right eye. The left eye is gone entirely. And so when that started happening, I thought, well, I don't want to be limited by that. What can we do to continue this project? And then it struck me I could start collaging images cut off of other shirts and create some kind of design of my own in that way. And I thought, what's the resource? I need a resource for that. And it turned out it was eBay. eBay is like being able to probe the contents of everybody's closet in the whole country. You know, you can go in there and root around and find something you want. That's essentially what it is. eBay, when I first started using it, had, I think about, with some phenomenal thing, 900 T-shirts listed, including new ones and other things as well. But all you have to do is just type in your subject you're looking for, and here's a whole page or two of variations on it. So that's how the collage, more complex ones, came into being. But as I say, I consider it a trash medium, and I was just having fun playing with that idea. And it was totally took me by surprise that they became considered valuable. You know, I still quite believe it, but that's what, again, it happens when you're in the right place at the right time. It's a sequence of things that I had no control over. I just kind of lucked out. Unfortunately, as it is now, nobody can't even do those anymore. Can't see well enough. So I'm having to search around for another way to use my work or my ideas. I did have this one I made with iron on, glue on bugs on a hairy chest, which I thought was rather nice. I could do that with my poor vision, but as far as doing the more complex ones, I'm not sure how to proceed with that. But maybe the project is just over. That's enough. On to something else.
Thank you for that, Pippa. I'm going to hand over to Fiona, perhaps Fiona, to draw some of this to a close. Obviously, there are a myriad conversations to be had here and Pippa's work, and hopefully if you're in New York, you'll get a chance to see the show if you haven't seen it. Certainly you should buy the book, and I'll give hand over to Fiona to bring this conversation today to a close.
Thank you. I don't have much to say. The show's open today and tomorrow and Saturday if anyone has someone to send in New York, and it might travel on, and Pippa's work will surely travel on. There's a book. Cooper contributed to the book. Fanny and Daniel contributed to the book. So did Matthew. I mean, Pippa is the book. So hunt it down, seek it out. I don't know. Thank you everyone for being here today.
Yeah,
I'm glad I don't know if Pippa, what was it like, Pippa, listening to people talk about your work? Was that boring or fascinating, or all these disparate people around the world?
It's a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah, I would think so. I'd be totally mortified. Yeah.
Well,
I think.
Yeah.
It's going to be permanently embarrassing because we're going to put this on Wycombe's website where it'll be archived forever.
Good.
I'd like to think,
well, embarrassment is the poor man's high. I've always said.
So I'd like to thank from Wycombe's once again. We'd like to thank Fiona and Moran for initiating this project. We'd like to thank our colleagues Fanny, Daniel, and Cooper, and Lois for joining today's conversation. There are really great images on all of our institutions' websites relating to the different installations and iterations of this exhibition, which I think is interesting in itself, how flexible Pippa's work is in terms of how it's reconfigured. And if you're in Los Angeles, make sure to go to the Hammer to see Pippa's work at the Made in LA show. And we'd just like to wish everybody a great holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. So thank you very much for joining us today.